commissioners and our guests. Mr. Chapin, is this on?
Yes, let me turn it on.
That's important. Show my lack of technology to the whole world.
Okay.
Okay. So we'll call the meeting to order.
I think we can approve the minutes. We don't have a quorum yet, but, and they're from, where we have two sets of meetings, minutes, from March 21st and from April 25th. I had the old date on our itinerary for today.
Okay.
I'll entertain a motion to accept them.
Motion to accept the minutes.
All in favor?
Aye.
They're accepted. I have just a brief report. I know Commissioner Small resigned. We will miss him. So we currently have 8 commissioners, 5 of which are necessary for a quorum. Same amount of people on the Supreme Court of the United States. So hopefully we won't have any 4-4 decisions pending. Our future meetings, and I guess that, they'll take us through the summer months. They're June 20th, July 17th, and August 22nd. And I guess we'll just stay tuned for email in case vacation schedules may interfere with them. But that's all I would have.
Okay. I want to point out that with Commissioner Small's resignation, and he wished us all well, and that his resignation was, he had some personal issues prompting him to resign, but we still have Bill Deisler, who is also a former police officer. I think it's always good to have the perspective of officers on the commission. He's not with us this evening, but still a solid member of the board. So tonight we'll do things a bit differently. As some of you have heard, Kelvin is actually on the phone. I guess you can see that, and so, yes. So Kelvin is on the phone, so he is going to be listening in as Joe Chapin reads his report.
Okay. All right, PAC Citizen Complaints Audit Overview. The Commission has received 12 complaints against police in 2016 as compared to 6 cases by this time in 2015. Commission investigators have 39 open complaint investigations from 2014 through 2016. Audited complaints, in addition to full investigations, we're currently auditing an additional 146 complaints. The Shallot case, for which we had the presentation 2 meetings ago, I'm working, at least the executive director is working on getting a representative from Special Victims Unit to address the board on a unit's operation at an upcoming meeting, and he's shooting for June.
Yes, just as a side note, I know Nellie Fitzpatrick had been interested in coming because she had used to work as a DA with the Special Victims Unit. She was not able to get permission from whoever has to give city employees permission to come and speak. So she won't be attending.
Okay.
So, but I'm not surprised. And hopefully we'll hear about them in June, because this case, it bothers me to no end.
Yeah. And, it would be nice if we could, if we can't get her to get someone else. I know Kelvin will work on that and try to get someone to represent them.
We should probably try to get somebody in from Internal Affairs to try to explain their report, because frankly, I don't understand it. And it's not the first time. I mean,
True.
We have problems sometimes with police in the field.
We can do that as well, no problem.
Okay,
Yeah,
good.
because sometimes we have problems with police in the field, but they are reacting, and it's hard to second guess. But when Internal Affairs does all the time in the world, and they review these, and they come to like a completely contrary opinion, I don't understand how that could possibly work.
That's a good idea. So we can follow up on that. I think we'll get cooperation one way or the other, either SUV or Internal Affairs.
Great.
Okay, the PAC annual report. We're continuing our review of details and findings of citizen and internal complaints from 2014 and 2015 to include in the report.
Can I, Kelvin, may I ask you, I know that we were waiting on some additional information from internal affairs so that our report was consistent. Do we have a sense when we will get that information?
Actually, I have pretty much all of that. At this point, we're really more interested in finding out some of the questions that are on the table about what we can reveal and not reveal. As everyone remembers, Phoebe and I have been meeting with the department around the right to know request and some information from that request that also bears on what we're trying to release in our annual report too. So there are just a lot of questions on the table between us and the police department with respect to what they feel is releasable. So we want some clarity on that before we include that information in our report.
Sure, and I guess we need to, at some point, set an end date. You know, and I think we all like the idea of the opportunity to release more, and so ideally that we would get that go-ahead from internal affairs, but and this is the worst version, that we can't release anything because we're waiting for them to say that we can release something. So maybe that's something we need to visit with BB in terms of an end date on that.
Absolutely.
Okay, Joe?
Stop and frisk, Bailey versus PPD. On Friday, April the 29th, Kelvin was a panelist at the Future of Stop and Frisk, and that was a town hall discussion at the New Vision United Methodist Church at 3259 North Broad Street. Now,
I would say it was billed as a town hall, it was a pandemonium fest.
yes.
I was there, you know, Kelvin handled himself quite well. He kept out of the mix. The mayor, not so much.
Yeah, he was caught off guard, looked like.
I bet.
And anybody would be off guard in that situation.
Yes.
Now, he only made a few remarks, but Kelvin tried to emphasize, one, that pedestrian stops should be discussed in detail at the captain's monthly town hall and smaller PSA, police service area meetings, which are held monthly. And the second point is that analysis of complaints and accountability is important in that we've identified about 200 caps from 2009 to present, which are related to pedestrian and vehicle stops. And we'll review the outcomes of investigations and results of any police board of inquiry hearings or command level discipline handed out in support of the city's goal of decreasing illegal stops and recognize, highlight districts and units that are showing improvements in those areas.
I want to say one other thing about the town hall meeting. So it went on for, I don't know, maybe it started at 6, they pulled the plug at 8:40. Does that sound about right, Kelvin?
That's correct.
And you're right that the mayor was caught off guard by the emotions in the room. To his credit, he remained throughout, and he and Commissioner Ross took a whole lot of abuse. And to their credit, you know, they sat there and took it, which I'm not sure it was really a discussion, and as people were fleeing the building, they were saying they didn't really feel like it was a discussion because there was so much turmoil. So if the goal was to get the mayor and the police commissioner to realize that people are dissatisfied with their handling on stop and frisk, I think that message got delivered.
Yeah, I think it did.
Can I ask about the point of emphasis one about the PSA level discussions, whether or not that message was received at all, or if we can feel some degree of confidence that that might be discussed further?
It probably needs to be discussed because this doesn't have high visibility. What do you think, Kelvin?
Yeah, I think people have heard it, and certainly it's something we've been saying repeatedly as this discussion has gone forward. And what I'm also trying to do in connection with that is break down the out data on roughly almost 1.5 or 6 million stops over since 2014. And what we're trying to do now is break that data down to the district and the PSA level, so that when we go out there, we can show you here the stops in the 19th district, et cetera. Again, the idea is to let people see the stops that are occurring in their district, of course, which they have much more perspective and comment on.
I would say that Kelvin made that presentation clearly. I would say the audience didn't hear it. Because the audience was already primed to be lathered up, so no matter what
Sure.
he or really anyone else said, short of the mayor saying, okay, immediately there will be no stop and frisk, and he even said some version of that, and there was, it was a difficult forum to have any real conversation.
Absolutely, it sounds exactly like that, and I'd say that this is a message that should be resonating with people, and I just want to emphasize that. It sounds like that environment circumstantially didn't work out quite that way, but we could continue on with that.
Right, and maybe the answer is not one large town hall. Maybe
Absolutely.
it is smaller venues, and people can kind of hear what they can do in their specific area. But because this kind of across the city, what's wrong with everything is wrong.
Engaging with a captain versus the mayor at the very least is higher level, right? So the greater visibility means people will engage differently, but also he has the visibility
That's a
of
delicate
running.
way of saying.
I try to be
It will
delicate, yes.
engage differently, yes.
Stop, question, frisk, and then walked it back nearly immediately. So it's
Yes.
contentious by default. Sorry for interrupting.
Who was facilitating the meeting? Who called?
The folks from Power and the pastor from that church.
Right, New Vision United Methodist Church.
Bishop Royster, is that who's at Power now?
Um,
So, I think he's the executive director.
It was Christopher, Kelvin, can you remind me? Norris.
Okay.
Chris Norris.
Chris Norris, and the pastor of that church. I think that people were so primed to be angry, and as they said, they felt that the mayor had changed his opinion on stop and frisk, so it was really difficult to have any substantive conversation.
Yeah. I was out doing a canvas.
One other point I would want to make on that particular meeting, if you saw the TV coverage of there were a number of people who actually left the meeting and were interested in actually hearing some of the details we have. Some of those folks actually know who they are, and I've been trying to contact them so we can follow up with them. Because
That's great.
People there who did want to hear details, and I want to try to follow up with them and give them those details.
Great.
Now, I was in the 19th district doing a canvas for an investigation that Kelvin recently assigned to me. And when I talk to people, they are really upset about the stop and frisk. And they feel like they're not being heard, so,
Right.
yeah. So it's out there. And even one particular individual, he mentioned he's concerned with what's going on in his district, not what's going on all around the city, but what's happening in his district. So he says he does go to the meetings, but he still feels that
He
he's
goes
not
to the
there.
PSA meeting?
Right.
What specifically is happening in his district? I couldn't understand.
Well, he feels like there's still too much stop and frisk, that there's certain good, he says they're good officers that know how to talk to people, but he constantly sees people being stopped for for nothing, as far as he was concerned, and all. He wants to stop crime, he says, but he wants them to stop criminals, not just stop ordinary citizens on a hunch. That was his point.
Right, one of the discussion points at the meeting was to raise the constitutional standard for a stop to probable cause. And so the city solicitor attempted to explain why the inherent challenges in raising that constitutional standard. But again, it was just not the forum for that level, that type of discussion.
So the next point was what brings our executive director to Canada, the PAC Hold Conference. He is a guest speaker at the Canadian Association for Civilian Oversight of Law Enforcement Conference, which was held in Saskatoon, Canada, from May 8th through 11th. And he tweeted from the event that oversight of police is ubiquitous across all 10 provinces of the nation. Police union leaders, though critical of oversight, also embrace the need for outside eyes on police. And they're curious about the U.S., where oversight agencies like PAC are exclusively municipal creations. The Canadian approach has resulted in a more monolithic landscape of agencies where the U.S. has seen a variety of auditors, boards, and commissions, and even hybrid combinations of investigative, policy analysis, etc.
So yeah, just to sort of add to that for a minute, what you see in Canada, as I noted, is that oversight is organized at what essentially would be the state level here. So instead of having the Philadelphia Police Advisory Commission and the Pittsburgh Complaint Review Board, you have the Pennsylvania Police Oversight entity, which would be which would have jurisdiction over not just Pittsburgh and Philadelphia, but all 1,000+ police agencies in the state. That's a significantly different way to organize oversight than what we see here in the States, and I think that's just obviously because of the history of our two countries. One of the union folks I talked to, and they were very, I chatted with probably 10 or 12 different union leaders while I was there. They were very forthcoming. One of them noted to me that, well, you know, Canadians simply trust government, his assessment, that more than we do here. They expect government to do things for them, whereas our folks in our country, ideology aside, left, right, or whatever, tend to be more distrustful, I think, of government. So I think that's kind of an interesting point that you made. It seems to go home.
Kelvin, I just this is Ben. I have one other question.
Sure.
Are the police in Saskatchewan more at the state level, or I mean, do they also have most police through local or municipal police departments as we have here?
They have some municipal forces, but it seems that the bulk of their police services is really concentrated at the province or state level. And that also makes the difference in terms of how services are handed out, et cetera. One of the challenges, for example, if you think about Canada, you think about those huge northwestern piece of the country. You have areas that are just huge to patrol. You know, one of the cops was telling me he has a patrol district of almost 300 miles wide. You know, so you get a call 300 miles away in the middle of one of those Canadian winters. You can imagine the difficulty of serving that type of call. So there's some very interesting and different geographic challenges to that the Canadians have that we don't in most of the country, where we think about our area in Philadelphia or even a large municipality like New York or LA. It's certainly not the kind of geographic challenges that they have up there. But the big thing to remember is that pretty much every officer who operates in Canada is subject to some type of oversight, which is very different than it is here.
Where does the funding come from in Canada for the oversight, if it's not municipal?
All comes from the state governments or from the provincial governments. Each of those agencies is empowered at that level and funded from that level as well. All of that is written into the provincial ordinances which create those agencies. and they're all permanent entities. There's no executive order agencies like us. These are all chartered at the provincial level.
Oh, I'd like to follow up, this is Michael, on Phoebe's question, because I recall maybe it was about 6 months ago, Commissioner Bowles had put together a list of different cities, the number of citizens, the number of officers, the average spending, and that equated down to this comparable spending per citizen or spending per officer in terms of oversight. Canada's context is very different, but it would be fascinating to at least compare that numerically, and then I guess more conceptually thinking about the geographic challenges and other social challenges that separate Canada from the US.
States in your survey, right?
It was cities.
Cities,
Yeah.
cities, US cities.
It's comparing like, apples and oranges. It's like when a presidential candidate makes a reference to Denmark, and Denmark's more than New Jersey. So it's kind of, it's kind of hard. At least when we did ours, we really tried to stick with comparable metropolitan areas to get it, I bet you these guys are nowhere nearly as well funded, as some of the agencies are in
There are some different ways of thinking
States,
about it,
yeah.
right? Because you're looking at the provincial level, you're encapsulating both cities and the rural areas, so it might flatten out what otherwise could be a lot higher. Comparing crime rates across Canada and the US is going to have some effect as well. But wouldn't it be staggering to find out that they have lower per capita crime rates and higher per capita spending on police oversight as well?
And I would bet you, I'm guessing that's probably the case.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would just say anecdotally from a couple of budgets I peeked at up there, and just in the conversations I had with the overseers. Some people complain some about budget, but they also seem to get pretty steady increases because of the way things are organized. So, they're not all certainly rich and over, have hundreds of investigators, but they seem to be pretty well resourced to do the job. I did not hear a huge number of complaints that, they cut our budget or anything like that. Quite the contrary. Actually, all of them seem to get pretty steady increases. The Canadians value this more than we do. That's the bottom line.
Right. All right, thank you.
Okay. Body cameras is the next point. In addition to material provided to the subcommittee last week, Kelvin added that recommendations from the Washington, D.C. Office of Police Complaints, and 2, the NYPD Auditor General's recommendations.
Does anybody have an extra copy of that floating around anywhere?
Yeah, so.
Thank you.
And the final item is police certification in PA. Last week, Kelvin met with St. Louis University Professor Roger Goldman and Judge Benjamin Lerner to discuss the value of potential changes to the way police officers are certified in Pennsylvania. Goldman, who has successfully advocated for improvements in 3 other states, Illinois, Missouri, and Florida, is the nation's leading authority in this area. This is another topic that we can explore by inviting PPD's representative to the state licensing authority at a future meeting. That concludes the report.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay. Phoebe?
Just would add that we had the subcommittee meeting, you might have already spoken about it.
We have
because I
not.
was a little late. And we're looking into whether PAC would like to publish something of some sort, and how we would, go about doing that. But first, we want to completely formulate a recommendation. And Ben, why don't you address that, and then we can talk about how
Sure,
we
so-
go forward from there.
Kelvin very helpfully circulated some sources from other cities about how body-worn camera footage is retained and made available upon request, and I looked at those and some additional sources and sent around some proposals about what what some best practices might be. And in particular, there was a report from the Reporters Committee it was actually testimony offered in Washington, D.C. to the police department there about with recommendations of how to make body camera footage available upon public request, and it seemed to be very helpful advice. And then a couple of problems or concerns that were identified in many of the sources that I summarized were, one, that body cameras tend to capture some footage that probably, I think most of us or all of us would agree is not necessarily right to be publicly disclosed. For example, images of a dead body or a severely injured person at a crime scene, conversations with a confidential informant that could jeopardize that person's safety, and also more generally the concern that by wearing a camera, people who are interacting with a police officer who's wearing a camera might feel chilled if they know that the footage is subject to public disclosure. And the other concern that was commonly cited was that of the cost of redacting footage if there's a public request. There's some very helpful information about how it's actually gotten much cheaper thanks to some new technological developments. It's pretty easy to do an automated, for example, blurring of a face. Like if there's a person on a video, there's software that now lets you identify that person in the first frame, and then the software tracks that person through the frame and blurs their face out automatically. So it's a lot less labor intensive than it might have been even just a few years ago, and that software is available at pretty low cost. Still, though, there's the issue of what happens if there's a big event like when the Pope visited and there were hundreds of police officers around. What if a news agency says, I want all that footage? To actually go through potentially thousands of hours of footage and to deal with, need to redact things on a officer by officer basis could be very burdensome. So I think that's just important for us to think about as we're formulating our recommendations.
Their thoughts, will somewhat mirror the state police. I would not be shocked, but we agreed to hear from them in terms of that position before formulating whatever we call it, whether it's best practices or we publish a paper or we do some sort of brief. I mean, a brief at this point seems sort of moot because we're not filing an amicus. So it would, I would recommend some other form of posting or publication based on Ben and the subcommittee's recommendations. And I would think that we'll get to that point. When did we say for timing, Ben? Later in the summer, very early fall?
Well, I would love to do it on that time frame. I think also, though, we're a little bit at the mercy. I think we owe it to the city to wait and hear what their response is.
Presumably since the other briefs are due May 25th, I'm still thinking we might hear something before then, even though we have, we're not further exploring the idea of the amicus. But it was my understanding that they were trying to meet relatively quickly. That could be an oxymoron, but
Will the city be filing something?
No, we'll not be filing a brief. But that was part of the issue.
And the deadline to file a brief, an amicus brief in support of the state police is already passed. Right. So any briefing that would happen from now on is going to be in support of the requester.
But it seems like a worthy deadline as long as we can adhere to it, get the feedback first, and we feel confident enough that we've researched enough that we can put our position, formulated position in writing.
Well, I feel like we've changed our focus from a micro focus, which is sort of like this one lady asking the state police for her episode, to really macro issues, about, thousands and thousands of hours of video footage. And while it's great to have some kind of, formula, and say something, because Lord knows what the city's going to come up with, I really think we've got to really be focused on the micro issue. That,
How do you feel, just a question about using the micro issue within the context of the larger issue? In other words, like sort of mirroring what Ben just went through in terms of a position and then potential exceptions, but making clear the uses where it should be more obvious, and using the example of growth as a more obvious one. Do you know what I mean?
She would be the peg, that would be the peg of the piece, and I think that what we've discovered in looking into this, that it's not just this kind of knee-jerk reaction, that there are all of these objections that have various degrees of merit, and so that we may want to raise those objections in the context of this person, but also, I think to give us some other guidance, because
There was
really,
even an issue raised in Grove by the Commonwealth Court judge about remanding it to figure out what to do about the audio component for citizens who may have been overheard, who may not have consented under the, under the wiretap statute. So even in Grove, there was a tiny little sub-issue that wasn't quite, decided and had to be. And I guess, look, I defer to what the subcommittee wants to do, but I guess if you're asking me what I recommend, I think exploring the issue and really researching it and being able to defend it, almost as if we were arguing, in an amicus position, being able to defend our position really well, is the way to go.
It's such a big issue. I hate to
Well,
have to wade through all of those.
I think we can raise some of the other concerns, but I think that the point of that is that some of this can be on a case by case. And so that we don't need to look at the kind of weight of all of the objections in the context of one issue that may be more straightforward.
What do you think?
I've said my piece. I want to hear other people's thoughts about it.
But are you comfortable?
I would say I think we can obviously do both things. The case that led us to this in the beginning, I think, as Chuck pointed out, is drawn to a narrower question whether or not dash cam footage should be released to the public under those circumstances. That's one issue. But clearly, as we watch the department roll out body cameras in our jurisdiction, we're going to have to speak to that as well. And I think that's kind of what we're trying to get to as well. What should the body camera policy for the PPD look like once it's out there and operating? And the questions of privacy are important ones, and they're not easy ones. Just frankly, to confuse even further, I would point out that, as Commissioner Gephardt said, there's certainly software that allows you to automatically blur faces now. That also, on the other end of that, can also mean that facial recognition software has gotten to the point where if you graft that onto body camera footage, that is a whole new capability that departments are now adding to, with all the various cameras that they use. We saw just last week with the issue around the department's little hoops over the Google, hiding the automatic license plate for your car by sticking a Google Maps decal up in the window, and the department was out in that. So, as simple as we try to make it, I think it's just simply going to get more and more complicated. There are a lot of issues around cameras out there that are going to end up on our table, either on individual cases or larger policy questions.
So we're still thinking more or less at this timeline that we're hoping to get something from the city in the summer. We're thinking maybe by the fall we would have some form of a position on it, even if it's pegged to this one case, but recognizing that there are these, all this other weighty stuff. I mean, I think that it's unrealistic to think that we will generate one piece that will definitively address this rapidly changing field. But to have some basic principles, I think, would be helpful.
I'm scheduled to meet with some folks over at the managing director's office around this question next week too. So hopefully I'll have more information for you guys from that as well.
Great.
The more I hear about this, that initially I was thinking overall high-level best practices would be a great idea, but Kelvin brings up a great point that ultimately we're dealing with a moving target, and technology will shift and people's adaptability will shift, and there's so many contextual possibilities, whether it's one person being pulled over or the Pope's visit, and therefore thousands of people and many, many cameras to sort from. Maybe focusing on this case, the micro cases, as Commissioner Voles mentions, for now is a best first step, because my concern is that we'll lose sight of this case if we go for the macro too quickly
I
and
think
end up
that's
getting
right.
enveloped in all of the what if.
Right, so maybe a peg to this with some kind of basic principles, certain things that we're thinking about it, certain things about transparency and some recognition of the other factors, but, kind of a list of principles perhaps would be helpful.
Using this specific case to create a first draft template, knowing that there's a lot that doesn't exist in this video that might apply to best practices.
See, because I have that feeling that transparency will always be trumped by coming up with, the Pope scenario. We're talking about one lady who wanted the dash cam footage of her arrest. I think we better focus on something like that as opposed to, something bigger. Technology will change before we are able to make an opinion.
Repeatedly.
So I'll play devil's advocate just for a minute, just to be, a thorn in your spine. The only reason I like pointing out some of the exceptions is it shows that we understand that there may be cases
Oh, yeah, sure.
where it can't be released.
No, I agree.
There may be privacy
I-
issues, and there may be, and I just think then, as an organization, we're making it clear that we favor transparency, and certainly in Grove, there appears to have been a need for it, and, and the reasoning that was argued there does not, seem to outweigh the need to produce to that lady, right?
Mhm.
But I do like the idea of Ben acknowledging exceptions, that there would be, there would be times when we can see it not being released where there is not consent by a bystander, based on privacy, where there is the use of a confidential informant, just to lay the roadmap that we've thought about it. We've really thought
think
about
that's
it.
right.
And
I
Grove
think
does
that's
not
right.
seem to present any obstacle here, but there may be cases that would. And then I just like that because I think it's a very thoughtful and well-rounded approach.
Right, it shows that it's an informed position, it's not just kind of a knee-jerk transparency at all costs. Something of a plan? Okay. Anything else you want to comment on?
No, I was going to ask Kelvin for an update on Koshman.
Calvin, did you hear BB?
I did, yes. We're trying to get next still to the investigator in the EMD's office, and then to the EME who's down in Delaware. I think we'll do that within the next week or so.
Okay. Okay. Pardon? No. Oh, okay. Any new business then? Any public comment?
Not this time, thanks.
Okay. Well, with that said, I believe this has been a short meeting, and we'll reconvene in June,
Yeah, June 20th.
June 20th. So do I have a motion to adjourn?
I do have one question.
Oh,
Sorry.
please.
On the public, inviting public, I'm just curious, like, we tend in, at least the meetings I've been to, haven't had a lot of public here. Is there any kind of effort to get people to come here, or just curious about?
Well, it's the mountain going to Mohammed. Maybe we have to go out to
Yeah,
the...
when we go out, we always get lots of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think Calvin always sort of works on that somewhere.
I will say, the one meeting, I wasn't sure when it was scheduled, and it was literally impossible to find it online. So maybe if there was a solid place to look, like on the Facebook page or on the actual website, because there's usually never any information. So I think someone should be in charge of maybe just posting something, just so if the public wanted to know, they could check. But I was unable to find an actual time or place for the meeting.
I'm sorry that you had that experience, and I think it's a great suggestion. I think we used to have a more diligent effort to have that posted, and so we should make sure that we return to that.
Yeah, we'll make sure that most of the reason why we've been stuck at 990, frankly, is because I've been running around doing stuff. That's pretty much over until September. I'll be around all summer long, so we'll get back to getting out to the neighborhoods within the next month or two.
Great.
And Joe, you're keeping an eye on the hairdresser's case, right?
Oh, yes.
All right, thank you.
In fact, I checked again today. The schedule was released for the day, and same story.
Okay,
You know,
okay.
so, I have it marked in my calendar
Thanks.
every 15th, you know, so in this case it's 16.
All right, anything else then? So, we had a motion to adjourn, all in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
He said,
Thank you, Kelvin.